There are over 250,000 housing units in the city of Milwaukee. 55% of city residents are renters, and their landlords are required to keep their properties in a reasonable state of repair. Milwaukee city government has a number of laws and programs designed to protect the health, safety, and welfare of city residents. Insight Milwaukee's topic today deals with rental properties. So we'll be taking a look at a law that protects tenants by requiring landlords to register with the city, and at a program that helps landlords by helping them keep drugs and other illegal activity off of their property. Last year, the Common Council approved a law requiring certain landlords to register with the city. At first, it applied only to residential property, but as of August 1994, owners of commercial property must also register. It's an effort to hold all landlords and owners of commercial property accountable for building code violations. All too often, this is the result of an absentee landlord. A property becomes run down, then is boarded up. These homes and any building with serious code violations can tear a neighborhood apart and attract gangs and criminal activity.
From an inspector's point of view, you come into a home looking at the condition of the premises, the walls, floors, and ceilings.
We went to a city foreclosed property with Inspector Roberts to look at the kinds of problems that can get a landlord in trouble.
As you can see, they need to have work done on the floor. The floor is in very bad shape. Walls and ceilings also in pretty disrepair. That plaster needs to be repaired. Obviously, the ceiling needs to be properly surface coated and painted. I could tell you for certain that there's probably a high lead content in the paint. We can see several layers of old paint. A person would want to be cautious here and make sure they get the proper advice in removing the lead or de-leading the ceiling before they start scraping and painting. Generally, you want a landlord that is responsive. If you have emergency problems, for example, you want an owner that's going to come in right away and address that problem.
City officials hope the recording requirement will help them track down and prod landlords to do repairs or prosecute those who rent substandard properties. The city is taking many landlords to court and wants to send a message that if you fail to provide adequate housing, you may face stiff jail sentences and fines. Landlords say they are not always at fault.
What's the quickest way to evict somebody when you know that there's drug activity going on?
The city offers a landlord training seminar for those who are concerned about all illegal activities on their properties. The program grew out of a community effort to fight drug houses.
What we did is that we went to all of these folks, all the movers and shakers in the landlord business, okay, and said on every side of the issue, tenants advocates, landlord advocates, we said, what's fair? What's not fair? What's legal? What works? Where are the gaps? And we started to put all this information together to bring you this program.
Landlords learn the warning signs of drug activity, proper applicant screening, ideas for rental agreements, how to maintain property, how to work with police and building inspectors, and what to do when faced with a tenant eviction.
What we want to do is to bring the landlords and property managers into helping us fight drug activity in neighborhoods. We want the neighbors to get involved and we want the police to get involved. So we're making a three-pronged effort that if all these folks get together, we really can make a difference in our communities and our neighborhood.
I had gotten involved with some people that I probably should have screened more carefully, and as a result of letting them into my units based on their hard time situation, I entered into some hard times. And so it was very timely for me to find out about this program and get involved with it.
Bob Stein says he was able to put what he learned into practice immediately. He organized other landlords in his Northwest Side neighborhood to share information and says the seminar is very worthwhile.
Probably the most critical thing I learned there was the ability to have policies up front. You show those policies to the tenants, and have a very consistent screening process, so that through the entire screening and through the entire application process, you're clear to the people that are applying what your intentions are, and therefore they are clear as to what they need to meet, what criteria they are going to meet, and you consistently apply that. My managers that are involved with the buildings, I've had them take the class themselves, and I'm just a real strong proponent of this program, because I think although much of the information is things people already know, number one, it never hurts to learn that information again, and it's just a good exchange to see other people having similar situations, similar problems that you're going through.
Landlords got some additional help earlier this year to deal with drug problems with a bill signed by the governor. It allows landlords to evict tenants quickly, following notice from a law enforcement agency that a drug nuisance exists in the rental property.
This is an important piece of legislation. It will allow people that are peddling drugs to be removed from neighborhoods within 5 days. And most landlords, the ones that are smart, know that's a good idea, because drug dealers are real tough on property.
We are going to throw the bums out. If a person can be thrown out for non-payment of rent, for the crime of being poor after 5 days, we certainly are not going to allow drug dealers to continue to peddle their poison.
And a closer look now at some of the rights and responsibilities of both landlords and tenants with my guests, James Stiers, Property Recording Manager with the Department of Building Inspection, Karen Long, Coordinator of the Landlord Training Program, and Judge James Gramling, Presiding Judge of the Milwaukee Municipal Court. Welcome first to Insight Milwaukee. A recent study by the Attorneys General of the United States, I believe, found that landlord-tenant disputes are number 9 on their top 10 lists of problems. And I'm wondering, from your perspectives, how do you view the landlord-tenant relationship as it currently exists?
Well, I'm surprised it's not higher on the list, actually.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of built-in possibilities for disputes in landlord-tenant relationships. Landlords have an economic incentive in providing shelter to tenants. Tenants are looking for the best housing available for their dollar, and there are likely to be clashes in the process. Along with that is the fact that there are many codes that apply to both landlords and tenants that regulate this relationship a lot more tightly than was the case 10 or 15 years ago. So there are a lot of built-in possibilities for disputes there.
And there's many laws that tenants and landlords aren't aware of that affect them. Many landlords don't see themselves as running a business, and with that business you have all these rules and regulations that go with running that business, and it hasn't been looked at as a business in the past. And presently it's the United States of America. You can go and learn how to be a dentist, but they don't teach you how to keep your accounts and run a business. It's the same thing with being a landlord. You can go and start the business, but it doesn't mean that you have to have the proper information to do it well.
Basically, it's just watching people trying to interact with one another and the normal conflicts that come up.
You say that, Karen, you say that some of the people aren't aware of their responsibilities and what kind of training might be out there for them, and that's what we're talking about today. Let's talk about that landlord training program that you are involved with. How is that working? How many people have gone through it so far?
The program is going quite well. I'm very, very pleased, and so are the landlords and the property managers that take the class, and probably the tenants that rent from the landlords who also take the class. It's part of a federal drug abatement grant between the police department and the Department of Building Inspection to train landlords on how to properly screen tenants to keep out destructive and illegal activity. We've had, in the course of putting this together, one of the things that we found out that there are 3 components that you need to put together to fight drug activity in a neighborhood on a block. And it's that citizens have to start doing things differently, the police have to start doing things differently, and the third component that nobody ever talked to before, even included, was the landlords and the property managers. And in looking at how to solve these problems, including those folks, and it starts with an educational effort. Folks will do what they need to do if they know exactly what that is. And what we did is that we went to all the movers and shakers in the landlord-tenant business, both the tenant advocates and the landlord advocates, and asked them, okay, what's legal, what's simple, what's fair, got the best advice that we could from all those groups to put the program together. And it's very different than other training programs that are put on by attorneys or other people that are involved in the business, because basically what they focus on is what a landlord can't do. And we focus on what they can do, empowering the landlord so they really know what their rights are under the civil law. And I think when Jim said it's a relationship between people, it is the civil law, and civil means being civil to each other in a sense. And with the civil law, you have certain rights that come with that, but you also have with those rights responsibilities. If you don't live up to your responsibilities, you start to lose some of your rights. So teaching those folks what those are really empowers them, and they feel much better about their business that they're running.
You're talking about things that they can do.
Can do.
Let's talk to Jim Stiers about some of the things that they have to do right now, at least on the landlord side.
On the landlord side, the new ordinance that became effective in August 1st, 1993 for residential properties, non-owner occupied, they are required to notify the Department of Building Inspection of their ownership of the building, the type of ownership, where they're the title holder or buying on a land contract, and who else is involved. So all owners are owners of record. Anyone has an interest in the building has to share that with building inspection so we know who to hold responsible. They have to provide a address, business or home that they may be reached at, and served a summons if they fail to keep up their property. They have to provide a telephone number, either business or home.
And this year it applies to commercial property as well.
Well, to the other properties in the city, and where it's owner occupied or not. So anything that is not a residential property should be recording now between August 1st and September 30th, because there's a free window to record. Other than that, it's $15 a property for the original recording.
It was rather controversial at the time it was implemented. How has it been working since then? And has it become less controversial?
We mailed out about 48,000 applications last July, early August, and it was very confusing. A lot of people still to this day say they've never heard of it, and we've had I don't know how many different publications and different interviews on TV and so forth, but somehow it keeps being missed. And it's not just the people out of the state of Wisconsin who say they haven't heard of it. I'm talking about people who still live in Milwaukee say they've never heard of this ordinance. So it's been quite interesting. There's been a large number of people who object to providing the information, but the ordinance is really specific because the Department of Building Inspection should be able to pick up a telephone and reach a landlord, and so should their tenants. And a tenant should have some idea from whom they're renting.
These two ordinances are meant to make this a better city, in effect, is what they're meant to do. How important is it that we prevent deterioration among the housing stock in the city of Milwaukee?
Well, deterioration affects everybody. It affects, obviously, the livability for each one of us. If it's not our property that's deteriorated, it might be our neighbors, and that affects the way in which we can enjoy our own property. It affects the property tax base in the city. If properties decline and have to be raised, it affects how much we're going to end up paying on our property taxes. So, and we all treasure this city that we live in, and to the extent we can't drive down every city or every street in the city and enjoy it and find beauty in it, I think affects the way in which we view ourselves and view the place we live.
When we talk about questions, and you talk about questions that landlords had about, or they didn't want to answer or ask some of the questions that you asked, let's get into that area of what can a landlord ask, what can a tenant ask. People are afraid these days to talk about these things because of the fear of a lawsuit. Where are the rights here?
The property recording ordinance is really a wonderful piece for landlords. And I guess, do you look at it as your cup is half full or half empty? In the training program, we talk about using the rental registration number to call to truly verify who is the present landlord of someone who's filling out an application considering renting your unit. You can check out that address to make sure who they're telling you is the landlord really is the landlord, to check out the telephone number to make sure it's the correct number, so you can really talk to the present landlord to see what kind of person this is that you're considering about to rent to. So, and it's the most up-to-date information you can possibly get. So instead of fearing the ordinance, you know, landlords can really use this to help them run a better business. And it's all putting it in the proper perspective. landlords too. If there's a fire in your unit, having the fire department be able to reach you. You need that number right there so they can do that and not find you maybe 6, 7 days later or whatever at a more cost to you to board up the building because the city's going to do it. I mean, there are all kinds of advantages to having that information readily available to the fire department, the police department, the Department of Building Inspection. It all benefits the landlord. But having the proper information to see it in that light is that's where education comes in. This ordinance just wasn't put into place to harass landlords. I ask everybody to help me dispel the myth that all landlords are Snidely Whiplash. You know who he was? He was the cartoon character that tied Nell to the tracks because she couldn't pay her rent. And then Dudley Do-Right comes along and rescues her. Well, we have this whole idea that all landlords are Snidely Whiplash, and that's not true. So giving people the proper information, and not just the proper information, but the avenues to be able to use those avenues to help them run a good business, to help them get decent tenants so their property doesn't get run down, so they have to stand before Jim later.
What are some of the specific things, Judge, that a landlord could ask a tenant and still be within his rights?
Well, the landlord, in choosing a tenant in the first place, has the right to know about who the tenant is, of course, establish identity of the tenant, establish the number of people that are going to be residing in the unit and their relationship to the prospective tenant. The landlord has the right to know what the tenant's income is and what the sources of income are that the tenant has. All of that information is, of course, important to a landlord in making an economic decision. The landlord can, of course, properly ask where the tenant has last resided in an effort to determine whether there were any problems that arose at that unit. Now, the uses the landlord makes of all that information are regulated somewhat, but as far as the landlord obtaining the information and then properly using it to make a conscientious decision about whether this is going to be a fit tenant, not just for this unit, but I think landlords have to keep in mind that there's a neighborhood involved and that they're bringing a new resident into a neighborhood, and they have an obligation to other people that live on that street or in that immediate neighborhood to put good people in that unit. So landlords can are obligated to make conscientious use of that information.
Should landlords and tenants be concerned about dealing with the legal process and going through it? Are there aids for them as they go through that process?
There's plenty of information available for landlords. I would imagine it's hard for them to digest it. The landlord-tenant relationships in Milwaukee are regulated by the City of Milwaukee, by the State Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection, and by state law. So it's not that difficult to learn what it is that you have to do, and Karen's program is an excellent way for landlords to become acquainted with the basic requirements, legal requirements that they have to follow in being good business people, because they're business people.
That's the big difference. There was a myth for years that the way to acquire wealth was to acquire property, and you just automatically it came. Well, there's a lot of work involved. It is a business, and especially with the regulations that are being imposed now in both the city and state level.
Yeah, those wonderful videos that come on late at night, how to become a millionaire overnight, no money down, buy 6 buildings, and away you go on to wealth. Well,
doesn't quite work that way.
It doesn't. I'm shocked to see the cases that we get in court where people go into this business of buying 6 or 8 or 10 properties from someone who has already run into trouble with the city, and now this new entrepreneur has decided, I'm going to make it work where this person didn't make it work, and it's like they have blinders on and do think that there's instant wealth, instant tax advantages that are going to accrue, and they don't really look forward to the responsibility part of it.
Karen, I think in your program you mentioned that you are not teaching such things as what we're talking about here, the legal responsibilities. You're not telling people how to be an attorney or how to do police work. It's how to be a landlord.
Right, and use property management skills, because we don't want people to be junior narcotics agents, and we don't want people to be super sleuths, if you will. We're just teaching some basic common sense things that are available to landlords to properly screen their tenants. And what are some of the questions they should be asking, why they should ask those particular questions, and then how you check out that information to make sure that it's correct and folks aren't setting up a front situation or lying to you in that process.
We're talking here a lot about what we can do for the landlord. What about the tenant? Many people, unfortunately, because of economic circumstances often live in substandard housing because it's the only thing they can afford at that time. What if they can't contact the landlord? Where does the tenant go for help?
There's numerous places. There are a number of tenant advocacy groups that are out there. Community Advocates is an organization on the 4900 block of West Fond du Lac. Some of the community-based organizations have counselors and things available. Presently, there is a group, Community Advocates, working with the city, putting together a tenant training program. Community, similar to the landlord training program. I know that Community Advocates is also working to put together a program to work with tenants who have a bad credit history from the past because of things that have happened to them, and working with them to say how you clean up your credit, what are the steps that you need to do that, how do you establish a good history for yourself, and the steps that you need to go about doing that. Right now, presently, we're looking at putting together a property management training program, because the program that I do is dealing with illegal and destructive activity, and there are many questions that come up that can't be addressed in that 5-hour program. Like, how do you figure out how much rent to charge? Well, that isn't exactly destructive or illegal activity, but it's a very legitimate question. So putting together some, not for the courses, the expensive courses for licensing that BOMA or IREM put together, the International Real Estate of Property Management and the Building Owners Management Association certificate and license to do large apartment complexes, but more of a 101 property management class. How do you set up your maintenance schedule? What should you be charging for rent to make it feasibly work? And training good tenants on how to be property managers, because there's not enough folks out there doing property management correctly to help the community.
Okay. Jim, let's review a little bit the new property recording ordinance that has now gone into effect in the city.
Okay, one of the things that Karen's trainees are using is calling to verify their prospective tenants' last place of rent. And what we've been finding, and I've had it so many times that, oh, that's not the number they put down. So they go back and then they might talk to them later and, oh, turned out that was a relative that they had said, just put their number down. But they're using it for a screening tool, which helps quite a bit. What we're having some problem with is getting the message out that the requirement is here now, and if you change address, change phone number, you're required by ordinance to notify the department within 15 days. If you sell a piece of property, you're required to tell us within 15 days that you've sold it. Same as if you acquire one. The difference is if you acquire one and don't tell us in 15 days, the fee doubles. It goes from 25 to 50. And that, I'd like to get the message out more that way, because I'm tired of arguing with people about it.
Okay.
There's interesting penalties if they don't comply, too.
We have a very short period of time left, Judge, but are the courts being tough with landlords who are causing problems in the city?
Well, I believe we are. The penalties that apply in cases where landlords don't live up to their responsibilities range from a minimum of $150 to a maximum of $10,000. Over the last couple of years, I would say over the last 3 years, many of our cases have resulted in fines ranging from $2,000 to $7,000, and some have resulted in fines of up to $10,000. We have about just under 1,000 cases a year filed in Milwaukee Municipal Court involving claims of violations of the city codes.